bringing you the stories behind the standards. This is the BSI Education Podcast with Matthew Childs and Alan Sellers. Today's episode is on how the United Nations uses international standards.
Hello, my name is Matthew Childs and I am with Alan Sellers. Hello Alan, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. And how are you, Matthew?
I'm very well, thank you. And I am also with
Cindy Parakill.
Hello Cindy, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks Matthew. Great to be on the pod with you and Alan.
Now, as De La Soul say, 3, it's the magic number. Now, Cindy, before you tell us a bit more about who you are, Alan, I've realised that over the last few episodes, we haven't really introduced ourselves. So probably this is a chance to tell the listeners who we are. So I'm Matthew Childs. I'm Educational Development Manager here at BSI, and we're all about developing the next generation of experts. Alan, how about you?
I'm Alan Sellers, and I've been working in compliance and approvals for over 10 years now. I am very interested in telling the stories behind the standards and bringing to life the world of standardisation.
Excellent. So, Cindy, that's Alan and me. Tell us who you are.
I'm Cindy Parakill. I'm a project manager within BSI's International Projects Department, and we're all about helping developing countries build resilient economies by improving their standardization functions, as well as promoting the uptake of international standards. So in my role, I design and deliver programs aimed to improve the overall economic competitiveness of countries by leveraging standards and the wider quality infrastructure system. I've been working in the field of international development for over 6 years now, both as an economist and a quality infrastructure practitioner, addressing trade development and now the digital transformation of developing countries.
Well, it's great to have you here, Cindy, and great to have you part of the EdPod squad, as I think only I call it. But it's great to have you part of the team. Now, obviously joining us today specifically because of that international experience that you've talked about. Now, today's episode is all about how the United Nations uses international standards, and more of which in a moment. Regular listeners, though, you may also recognise Cindy's voice. Those of you who are well, actually, it's not eagle-eyed, is it? Whatever the equivalent of eagle-eyed is for ears.
Bat ears, maybe?
Yeah, bat ears, maybe. Doesn't sound very nice, though, does it, bat-eared? But you're probably right. That's probably what it is. So that's who you are, Cindy, but we're also interested to find out where you are. Now, Alan, where are you today? Are you whereabouts in the world are you?
I'm still in lockdown in the southwest of the UK in what you believe is a mansion.
We have talked about Alan's West Country mansion in the past. I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's absolutely huge. Well, as usual, I'm stuck in my loft in southeast London. Last week on the podcast, I did talk about it persisting down with rain. It's actually quite sunny and bright here today, so maybe the weather has turned the corner, even though we're still in mid to late January. You never know, spring might be on its way. But Cindy, where are you? Paint us a picture where you are.
Why don't we try this? Close your eyes and imagine an imperial city in the heart of Europe, synonymous with classical music and famous for its New Year's Day concert. Any guesses?
Is it Birmingham?
Sure.
We've got a quiz. Well, but yeah, Birmingham has a famous symphony hall. Is it? Yeah, is it Birmingham, Cindy?
Not quite. It's also quite known for its rich heritage of art, culture, history, and coffee houses. And for the nature lovers amongst us, it's also popular for its romantic river and woods.
Are you sure it's not Birmingham? It's got canals.
I'm quite sure. Any further guesses?
This is putting a geography and sort of cultural knowledge to the test here. How about, is it Budapest, something like that?
Not quite, but close. You're wrong. It's none other than the beautiful Vienna.
The feeling is gone, only you and I. It means nothing to me. It means nothing to me. Oh, Vienna. Here's me moving things on quickly from that painful singing attempt with a quick reminder that for more information on BSI education, go to bsigroup.com/education. This link and others on the themes raised in this episode can be found in the episode notes. Do please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts, and share us on social media using the hashtag BSIEdPod. And if you have any comments or questions about this episode or ideas for future episodes, then do please get in touch at education@bsigroup.com. We really welcome your feedback. Now, the aim of this podcast is to bring you the stories behind the standards. And we thought we would go big for this story because today's episode is all about how the United Nations uses international standards. Now, the world is racing to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, by 2030. We covered the SDGs back in episode 7 of the podcast when we spoke to Vimal Mahendru of the IEC, and that's still available to listen to on the podcast feed. But for this episode, we're covering topics beyond just the SDGs. For as well as attempting to try and meet these ambitious goals, countries are at the same time trying to combat the present crises of COVID-19 and climate change, as well as the ongoing challenges of demographic changes and the digital transformation of both societies and economies. To talk about these issues, our guest today is Dr. Bernardo Calzadilla-Sarmiento from the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, or UNIDO. We talked to Bernardo about how the UN uses international standards to support member states to address these important policy challenges. But before we hear from Bernardo, can we have your standards desk of news, please, Alan?
The headlines this week. There's the draft standard for the measurement of wireless power, a warning, active volcano zone symbol, and guidance for the use of social media in emergencies. Now, each year seems to bring a new iteration of the must-have mobile phones, and each year it seems they lose a connector of some sort, like a headphone jack, or maybe even the buttons. So is the power connector the next to go? Well, Draft Standard IEC 63288 Edition 1 Wireless Power Transfer may be just signalling that the days of power connections are numbered. The standard defines how to measure and evaluate and report energy consumption and transfer efficiency in wireless power transfer. Now, volcanoes. Are you worried about the one in your backyard? Well, worry no more. There's a new symbol on the block. The Warning Active Volcano Zone symbol. That's a new addition to the ISO 7010 standard. Warning Active Volcano Zone, which is, I believe, Amendment 116. Now, for those of you that don't really get to grips with symbols and don't see them all over the place like I do, a little bit, maybe beautiful mind, I don't know. But, symbols are used everywhere, with perhaps the most famous being the on and off symbols. With a 1 for on and a 0 for off, it brings binary to the home of millions worldwide. So, Matthew, I wonder maybe we need to start finding out the stories behind the symbols as well as the standards.
I think we probably should. Although active volcano news, that sounds like a potential new feature there. I'll be very excited to hear that every week.
It does, doesn't it?
Talking about the connectors as well, I think the power connections are certainly numbered in this house. I can never find one, because the children are always charging some sort of device with it. So, they're definitely numbered in this household.
And finally, we have ISO 22329, Guidelines for the Use of Social Media in Emergencies. Now, I can't help but think of a certain ex-president when I heard about this standard. And this document specifies guidelines for the use of social media in emergency management. The guidelines provide guidance on how organisations and the public can use and interact through social media before, during and after an incident, and how social media can support the work of emergency services. There's no mention of fake news, but the guidance does have definitions for both incorrect information and purposely misleading information. All three of these standards are now available for public comment via BSI's Standards Development Portal. So get commenting now and shape the way these standards, or symbols, develop. And that's the Standard Desk of News for this week. Back to you, Matthew and Cindy.
Thanks ever so much, Alan. And as always, you can find the links to those stories in the episode notes.
Now, as we mentioned earlier, our guest today is Dr. Bernardo Calzadilla-Sarmiento. He's Managing Director of the Directorate of Digitalization, Technology and Agribusiness at UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. UNIDO's role is to promote inclusive and sustainable industrial development among its member states. Established in 1966 by the UN General Assembly as an autonomous body within the United Nations, in 1979 it went on to become one of the specialized agencies of the UN. With more than 25 years of international experience as a senior quality and standards expert covering Africa, Asia, Latin America, and holding various senior management positions with the UN and ISO, Bernardo definitely has some very powerful insights to share with us on how the UN uses standards as a tool to build resilient and agile economies.
So, Bernardo, it's absolutely fantastic to have you with us on the podcast today. I'm going to ask you a question that we ask all of our guests. We're really keen to find out their standard stories and their standards journeys. So how did you get to this point? Have you been seduced by standards?
Let me say first, thank you for having me, Matthew. This is a wonderful opportunity. I am passionate about standards and how did it start? It's a good question. I think we don't start with the passion. We rather end with the passion. I started because I studied industrial processes, and I had already an entry to quality. But as a matter of fact, when I started to work with UNIDO, I was assigned a project that was called Standards at Company Level. While I was an expert in quality, I didn't quite understand what it is. And it was a project on total quality management designed by Japanese engineers. And all what they were doing is methodologies to introduce standards at the company level, which will then improve the performance of the company and the competitiveness. And at the end of the day, it was basically the way in Japan they were introducing at the companies the total quality management concept. It was also a time that ISO had launched what I would call the flagship standard, ISO 9000, where quality management became so central. So quality management became a very important element for many years in the 90s, and it changed also the standardization in some way, which was more on the technical side, more on the specification, and it changed because with the ISO 9000 you moved to a new set of standards, which was process management, and I was definitely seduced by that. But later on I started to work with ISO, and I must say, when you talk to many people about standards, and I had the opportunity to invite the World Bank to join our work with the partners, the person who joined, she was completely not understanding standardization is so dry, people are engineers, etc. But I could think that there is a rule that people after a while become, as you have put it, seduced, become passionate. And from there, a different journey started for me, because I applied for a position in ISO, in the ISO Central Secretariat in Geneva. And I got a position to be the Secretary of DEFCO. The DEFCO is the Developing Countries Policy Committee. And one of the executive activities of this position was also to do training. And with that, I supported and I helped to create what at the time was the ISO Academy, which was a system of providing training on both, on the one side, on standards development process for delegates attending technical committees, and later on also we worked a lot to disseminate standards in the countries. I repeat, on those days, the key standard to promote standardization was ISO 9000, but many other standards came later, including environmental management system standards. And I also had the privilege, I would say, to participate in a multi-stakeholder process which was the development of a guidance document. It's not an international standard in its status, but it's a guidance document for social responsibility. And this was a journey which was extremely important for my passion for standards, because I really learned what it means to have multi-stakeholder engagement systems. We work with many stakeholders, enterprises, governments, consumers, and labor. So this was really a journey that accompanied me for a long while, until I rejoined UNIDO. I came back to UNIDO after having spent also several years at ISO. And I also followed very much the standardization processes at the WTO. The TBT agreement, the SPS agreement are based on standards. As a matter of fact, the standards definition used in the WTO is an ISO definition. And in that, I rejoined something that is very important for UNIDO, is the work on quality infrastructure. So in quality infrastructure, we use as a basis standardization.
Now, Bernardo, that's absolutely fantastic. I asked you whether you've been seduced by standards. You're certainly that. And certainly, I think that's happened to you. But you're also very much steeped in standards now, which is fantastic to hear. Now, you've touched upon some of the issues such as quality, which we're going to ask you, on later in the interview.
And Bernardo, that your story is really remarkable and your passion really does shine through, and brings us to the UN. So the first topic that springs to mind when thinking of the UN are the Sustainable Development Goals, as the world is racing to achieve them in less than a decade now. There's a lot of work being carried out mapping the contribution of standards to SDGs. So in 2 sentences, what would you say standards play in achieving the SDGs? What role do they play?
Well, thank you very much, Cindy. First of all, let me say that the SDGs, they were produced in 2015, and this was also a sort of consensus building process similar to standardization. And this was a process where there was already a lot of harmonization. And certainly until then, and we are in 2015, until then, the main, I would say, the main raison d'etre that everybody saw in standards is the contribution to economic competitiveness, to export, to facilitating trade. But with the SDGs, we have the 17 SDGs that are structured around 3 basic pillars: people, planet, prosperity. And the SDGs have shown that standards contribute to all these SDGs, be it health, education, energy. All standards are contributing to environment. So I think that the SDGs has shown the widespread and the scope of the contribution of standards to development. They are an important driver for sustainable development.
Now, I'm afraid there's no avoiding really the crisis of our times, is there? COVID-19. What lessons do you think it offers about the role of standards in the developing and the developed world?
COVID has certainly reinforced the importance of standards and the importance of standards to each of the SDGs. Standards are essential for a test, and a test have been a very important word and concept that came during COVID time. Resilience was very important. Business continuity was important. So we have heard a number of concepts during COVID time, and we have seen how standards are essential to contribute. Standards in the health sector also have been essential to ensure that personal protective equipment meets the requirements and is effectively protecting people. Standards and the mutual recognition, the standards build trust. This is important to recognize. And in times of COVID, we were on their need to build trust that was possible thanks to the standards fulfilling its function, helping that cross-border movement of goods has been more and more trusted and could resume in cases of disruption, or in some cases, disruption did not happen because we had a good standardization and mutual trust system in place.
Yes, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of useful pointers around standards and trust that we should take away from this forerunner pandemic to become more resilient and ultimately build back better. As they say, adversity often forces societies to advance. Looking more broadly and longer term, the great challenges we face relate to climate change, demographic change, and digital transformation. However, before looking into the future, let us briefly look back at how standards have enabled economic development and growth in developing countries thus far. So, what would you say have been the main contribution of standards with respect to key themes such as trade, industrialization, digital transformation, and climate change?
My entry point for standards has been quality, and quality embeds standards. And what you need to increase the competitiveness is better quality and reducing cost. And by reducing cost and improving your quality that you reach through standards, you are improving your competitiveness. And by improving your competitiveness, you are enabling your integration into the global value chain. So I think this is an important aspect to say. For many countries, it was important to be able to measure better, because when we talk about standards, also we have a variety of standards, not only documentary standards, but physical metrological standards. I remember a very important story in Chile where they were exporting copper to Asia. I don't remember if it was Japan or which country. And they found out that their whole scales and their whole basic standards were not in place, and how much money they were losing. So it's not only about increasing export, but having also the right costing. So it is about boosting economic competitiveness and helping the companies to reach the markets.
Ever wondered how standards are made? Or who gets to make them? Why standards are numbered the way they are? And who gets to choose these numbers? Or maybe you have a burning question about standards related to your job or the sector in which you work? Well, this is your chance to ask the BSI Education Podcast, and we will get your questions answered. All you have to do is record your question via audio message and send it to education@bsigroup.com. We'll put the best ones to a panel of experts in a future episode, so stay tuned.
Now, looking ahead then, one issue that has come up on some of our podcast episodes in the past, and it's something we probably will return to in the future, is the relationship between governments and legislation, regulations and standards. Now, do you think that perhaps governments have focused too much on legislation and regulation when in fact in fast-moving situations, a focus on standards would have been better? And do you think this situation will change in the future?
You are making really the key questions, I think, of regulation is precisely that, and the divergent views that basically government has and private sector has. Yeah, private sector consider that technical regulation should be even governed by themselves, by technical regulation, by company regulation, and the government, they want to enforce. So I think that it is correct to say that there is a virtuous relationship, or we should aim at having a virtuous relationship between standards and regulations. We have seen so many examples where standards are used as a basis for regulation, and as such, they contribute more. Personally, I believe that regulation is much better reached when there is a voluntary contribution to that. Yeah. While on the other hand, there are certain areas, it may be even in the environmental side, in some areas where you need to define maximum requirements and or minimum requirements so that you ensure certain objectives to be met. What we need to do is to provide the opportunity to identify best practice.
So, the most prominent use case of international standards has been to facilitate trade and gain market access, as you said, economic competitiveness. And from our field of work, Bernardo, we know that many developing countries struggle to demonstrate compliance of products with standards and market requirements, ultimately resulting in border rejections. international agencies have been delivering a variety of technical assistance to improve the quality of products and thereby seamlessly integrate into global value chains, as you mentioned. So tell us a bit about UNIDO's approach to quality infrastructure and value chain development, and specifically how it uses international standards.
Yeah, I think we need to look back a bit in the evolution of standards. UNIDO has played an important role in the establishment of many standards bodies in the developing world. And at the beginning, standard institutions were created as an umbrella organization. You had metrology there, you had testing there, you had certification, they were doing everything. But little by little, best practice showed that you have to separate certain functions. Metrology institutions part were separated, standards were separated, and there was a need to have also an overall view how to separate function and still to see the whole as a system. As a matter of fact, in the past, you had a lot of separated laws for standards and metrology law, metrology act. Still, many countries use this system, but it is only in the 90s and after the 90s that the concept of quality infrastructure was coined. UNIDO was instrumental to support this notion because we wanted to see it as a system, and as a system where you have a holistic approach addressing the different levels, the regulation and the policy that we mentioned, the institutions, the basic institutions such as standardization, metrology, and accreditation, and then to see that you have to provide services, quality infrastructure services, inspection, certification, calibration, etc., and you move into having also to work on the demand. So UNIDO has been trying to show that there is a need to create a balance between what countries offer in terms of quality infrastructure. We are using now the term of quality infrastructure, and what is the real demand. We had a number also of bad experiences. We the development partners. For me, it was extremely frustrating when I visited sometimes some countries, and I see that the laboratory infrastructure could be there, and then you find out that there is a request and people ask you to help them to set up the labs, and then you dig a bit more and they have received already the equipment and the equipment has never been installed, etc., because there was never a link between what is being created and what is the demand for that. So UNIDO has been very much trying to look that you need at the same time to work with the enterprises, to work with the consumers, so to create a demand. And for that, we developed a value chain approach. And we have been quite successful with that. I think quite successful to apply it in our project, because a bit the approach of UNIDO is we try and test this as pilots in UNIDO, and then we try to give it to all other partners to also work with them. And in many cases, the ideal is when the countries themselves, they manage to adopt certain approaches. And this has been happening in many parts of the world. I was very surprised recently to read that even a country that is so big and so complex and so organized like Mexico, they were working in putting a system of quality infrastructure through a quality policy.
That's really interesting. I like how you've really brought out the holistic and systemic approach that is needed. So just going back to the beginning, you mentioned the 3 Ps, planet, people, and prosperity. And I'd like to add one more P, partnerships, which are key to accelerate change and moreover to ensure that the transformation achieved is sustainable, be it cross-sectoral, public-private, regional, or even at the international level. So tell us a bit about your collaboration with regional bodies and the INET-QI, the International Network for Quality Infrastructure.
Yes, and you are being very, very comprehensive because, as a matter of fact, the SDGs have structured 5 Ps.
Yes.
The partnership is there is a goal for partnership, and there is one for peace, which is governance. And I am contributing to your contribution in the sense that when we look at partnerships, we have to look also at the contribution of standards for governance, for good governance in many areas, in the application of the thematic areas where it happens, but also the contribution of precisely to forge these partnerships. And what we saw is that UNIDO, being a single entity, cannot do it alone. And that we needed to start having common understanding of these concepts, like system approach, like holistic approach, like policy approach. Yeah, because as mentioned to you, at the WTO, the basic concept is taken from an ISO definition, which is the definition of standard. But when you move into the other system approach, which is quality infrastructure and a holistic approach, we had no definition. Yeah, but UNIDO cannot come up alone with a definition, because other important partners were having and using quality infrastructure with slight variations, including market surveillance, including what we call the basics. So we were able to really work with INET-QI, and INET-QI was also the outcome of a long process of collaboration. At the beginning, it was called the Joint Committee on Metrology, Accreditation and Standardization for Developing Countries, for coordinating that. And finally, we came to not a committee, but a network, and then the network decided to call International Network for Quality Infrastructure. And with this group, which basically has the global player, the international players on metrology, standards, accreditation, and some of the agencies, international agencies that contribute, such as UNIDO, ITC, the World Bank, UNEC, we brought them together in expert group meetings to forge the concept and the definition of quality infrastructure. And we work also together on quality policy. This was a very, very interesting work, because we could agree. And the most rewarding element of this joint work together is that all these basic documents that we did with INET-QI today are common practice. We see that many countries, I mentioned to you the case of Mexico, they apply the quality policy concepts that we develop without any intervention of UNIDO anymore. It was completely internalized. I think in the UK you have something like a standards network, I don't remember, on a Commonwealth network for standards. And I have seen that they have been disseminating the quality policy principles a lot in the Caribbean countries, yeah, in cross-Q countries. And recently also we have, as a matter of fact, we are launching this next week, our work, and it was a spring off of this quality policy work was to work on lab policy. I mentioned to you sometimes the difficulties countries have in have a balanced laboratory policy, because the chief of a laboratory, he wants more equipment, he wants more, but he doesn't look that he is really having the demand, that he has all the competencies, that he is accredited. So we have a competition of the labs in many countries, public, private. So we started to address the problems on specifically laboratory infrastructure development through a lab policy. And this is normative work in somewhere, not so strong as a formal policy would be, because this is a consensus-based development of a policy in the countries. It is an interactive policy making with the private sector, with the stakeholders, but still it pretends to align and defines the roles and responsibilities. So next week we are very happy. UNIDO will launch this laboratory policy, which we worked out with a different set of organizations, more with laboratory-based accreditation bodies, metrology bodies. And we hope that this will help the countries to have better development, best practice, but also to improve the governance.
That's really interesting, and I wish you all the best with your new publication. But just going back to the Commonwealth Standards Network and countries taking up this quality policy work that INET-QI and I believe BSI also contributed in around 2018, it's the best testament to see that there's a general uptake of these documents. So that's excellent. So The global economy is dynamic and changing apace, driven by digital transformation and other factors that we mentioned previously. The quality infrastructure system continues to have an important role to play in achieving these SDGs, but critics say that it is a relic of the analog age, too slow to respond to current needs. So what changes would you like to see over the next 5 to 10 years to enable it to play an even more important role in helping achieve our goals and the less developed countries to prosper in global markets?
It is very, very strong the way you put it. I think that in certain areas, the quality infrastructure is fulfilling its role, but there is a need to modernize, there is a need to update, and there is a need to mainstream, I would say, to introduce all these new technologies in the quality infrastructure in institutions. But at the same time, as we are looking how we are going to emerge out of COVID-19, also to look at we will be able to recover well only if we try to do it better and with a vision of sustainability. So what we have been promoting, and I would say more than promoting, is advocating, is to introduce these new technologies in quality infrastructure. In standards, anyhow, standardization has started to have a wonderful start in developing standards for the different areas, be it 3D printing, be it IT-related issues, be it blockchain, including all these elements have been benefiting from standardization, and there is more to come. We see that standards can contribute also to cybersecurity, to artificial intelligence, and all what the dangers relate to this, and making it fit for purpose, fit for this new reality. The first thing to do is that quality infrastructure institutions need to change the mindset. And there I agree fully with you. We need to change the mindset so to be open to introduce these new technologies and also to serve for these technologies. The process is coming tremendously fast. This digital transformation is coming fast, and many risks are being are coming with these new changes, and standards can definitely help to mitigate and to have some better addressing the absorption capacity. For developing countries, one of the big challenges adopting the standards requires infrastructure, and for that, many countries are not equipped. So again, it is all about having a more comprehensive, more holistic view of all the requirements, so that the evolution and basically your question, I see it, how do I see it in the long run? And in the long run, we have to change, and we have to introduce all these new technologies into the way we do our work. And this will come because there is a demand for it. And again, this is the important nexus that is important in standards with society, is there needs to be the demand and the need to introduce them, and then standards are called to play their full role.
Bernardo, just sticking with developing countries, you've talked in the last few answers about the sort of systemic issues, but just drilling down a bit into sectors here. So what sectors do you think in developing countries need further standards-related support, and how should we approach this to get it right? And in particular, how do you see standards evolving in the agri-food sector to promote sustainability and efficiencies?
Thank you. Definitely, as I mentioned to you before, we have been looking more and more on sector-specific approaches. And just to name one, food safety is a sector that requires a tremendous amount. And food safety has shown also in COVID times to be so relevant, and it is not only about the safety itself. It's also about food security, is avoiding food waste. So I think that is an area where standards are coming to play an important role to contribute to improve. And why? Because in other areas like machines or automotive, etc., you are dealing more with physical goods. But in the case of agriculture, many of these goods are perishable. And this is why a good management of the processes requires a strong adherence to many regulations sometimes, but standards can help to have good practice and exploit all the potential that you can have. So this is one sector. Energy is another sector where developing countries, many developing countries that have been based on coal and have not good practice in saving energy. You need to, the industries that are working in many developing countries are completely inefficient. And also the creation of new renewable energy is a very important way where standards can play a role. So the areas are diverse. I would say that in developing countries, not looking it from the economic side, but from the environmental side, standards are called to play an important role.
The sectors that you touched on, agriculture, energy, and environment, are all undergoing a lot of changes. And the key concept here that arises is sustainability. So we're aware that UNIDO is an active member of UNFSS, the UN Forum on Sustainability Standards. Could you tell us what this forum does and how it links with international standardization?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as I was mentioning, sustainability is a key concept, but I always think on the history of standardization and international standards changed from being a technical specification type of standards to process-oriented standards. But then there was the next movement is to include social issues. And this is when I had the privilege to be part of this standardization process in ISO on the working group on social responsibility. And social responsibility englobes a number of issues, be it to protect labor, be it to protect the environment, sustainability, and also to make sure that companies can also demonstrate that they are complying with it. So this is another area where we would think there are strong controversies which system should be dominant. Should it be regulatory, purely regulatory on labor, or can we use soft regulation such as a standard to regulate? And a softer way of regulated came with sustainability standards, which are many of them coming from the private sector, coming from the NGO world, and they have been mainly coming in the food safety sector. Tesco and all these big buyers started to have their own way of assessing safety. They want to sell also a better quality to demonstrating that they are more stringent, and sustainability standards started to become basically a problem. There was too much divergence, there were too much variety, and this is why under the leadership of our sister agency, UNCTAD, they created the Sustainability Standards Forum to discuss also the challenges for developing countries to adopt these private standards. These sustainability standards have been growing in importance, and the more we work in the value chain, we see that there is demand, because that's what the companies that are working in the value chains we support are calling for. So I think that this movement will continue, but we have also to make sure that it does not become a barrier to trade, a hidden barrier to trade for developing countries, which really have difficulties to comply with standards, whatever it is. And this is why there is a role for us. There is a role to show from the field to this forum, which is more a policy and global forum of debate, how companies feel affected by this. We feel that our engagement is in sustainability standards will continue, is very promising, and we think also that sustainability standards are here to stay. as back to back to other levels of standardization, while being an organization that is very much anchored in the WTO. We strongly promote international standardization as the most preferred way to do standards. And sure, international standards are based on national standard. BSI is a big contributor of standards. We see our work now. I recently engaged in a process on circular economy, and BSI already had the standard on that. So we try to engage in standards in the different domains, and we don't do it from an academic point of view, but we do it because we are in constant interaction with the companies which demand certain services from us, and that's the way we are evolving. And this is how we become all passionate about standards.
Absolutely. This has been really insightful, Bernardo. And it's great to see that there are so many forums for collaborations between UN agencies and other stakeholders to build back better and a greener world. So thank you. One final question from my side. What are the developing country trends that standard organizations, be it at national, regional, or international level, should be looking out for?
So in the next future, we will focus very much on innovation. And innovation is very important in a time where we are really confronted with so much technological change, and where we will have to innovate after the disruption that represented COVID-19, and moving into precisely a more sustainable moment, and that requires the world. Climate change, as I said, is the next big challenge for the planet, and standards can play a role in shaping technologies, and technologies will help us to build back better towards sustainability.
Now, Bernardo, I just wanted to mention to listeners, we've covered a huge range of content in this interview, which is fantastic. So just a reminder to listeners that you can find links to many of the things that Bernardo and Cindy and I have referenced in the episode notes. Now, Bernardo, I've been keeping a track here. I think we've got 6 Ps. We've covered people, prosperity, planet, partnerships, peace, and I think passion too. And I'd like to add a 7th and final P, which is pleasure. So it's been our absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking part and for sharing your insights and your perspective with us. Oh, actually, that's an 8th one, isn't it? That's an 8th P. So just thank you very much.
It was indeed a pleasure. And as I heard this morning, I wish you a happy year of the ox.
You have been listening to an episode of the BSI Education Podcast. To find out more, visit bsigroup.com/education.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.